In the Gemara today, on Daf Chesam with Beis, 3 lines from the bottom, it mentioned yesterday in the Gemara the Lishkas Parhedrin, the room where the Kohen Gadol was placed 7 days before Yom Kippur. So in connection to this, the Gemara brings another halacha which is really unrelated, but it also mentions regarding that halacha, the word Parhedrin, so it brings it here and explains it. Taran Asam, we learned in a Mishnah in Masechta Demai. Now, demai we know is any produce that comes from an Amma Oretz where there's a suffix if the meisters were taken from it. So if you buy from an Amma Oretz, you have to separate the meisters again. But in this Mishnah, it says a certain kula, a certain leniency about this halacha. Hanachtoimen, bakers, loichayvu, oisan, chachamim, lahafrish. Chachamim did not obligate them to separate again. If they're buying their flour from and their produce, whatever it is that they're using from Amaratzim, so usually you have to separate again, but these bakers, Chachamim, did not obligate them to separate again the Maisres. Ela Trumas Maiser. The only thing they have to separate is Trumas Maiser, which is basically a tenth of the Maiser that goes to the Kohen, and the Chala, which is in 100th of this produce, and the Chala. And also then the Chala, when you make the dough, you have to take off the Chala for the Kohen. Those are the two things that he'll have to separate. But all the other Maisres that you usually separate by demai, where it's a suffix, you don't have to separate. So the Gemara now explains here. We could understand why we're lenient regarding these bakers that they do not have to separate Truma Gedoyle. Tanya, because we learned in the Braisa regarding demai, it says as follows. This refers to Yechanan Kohen Gadol, as Rashi here brings. He was the one that made the Gzeira for demai, that you should give Meisters again. So he sent around to inspect all the Yidden in all the different cities of Yidden. And he saw the only thing that Yidden were careful with was giving Truma Gedoyle. That goes to the Kohen. But the other Meisres, the Yidden were not careful with. And that's when they made the Gzeira to give of demai, anything that comes from the Amaratzim. Maiserani, and we could also understand why Maiserishan and Maiserani you don't have to give. Nami loy, you don't have to give. Maiserishan and Maiserani, you have to give Maiserishan to a Levi, and Maiserani goes to poor people, and it's just a matter of giving them this as a gift, and it becomes theirs. But if you are buying something which is a suffix, so then why should you have to give it to them? It's a suffix if it belongs to them. So you can say to these aniyim or these leviim that usually goes to them, prove that it wasn't given yet to you, and I'll give it to you. So even if you have to separate it, but you'll be able to eat it yourself because they can't prove that it belongs to them. But however, when it comes to ma'isa sheni, nifrishu, you should separate the ma'isa sheni, and v'nisko, you should bring it up to Yerushalayim, v'nechle Yerushalayim, you should eat it there in Yerushalayim. So Rashi explains, just like when it comes to Trumas Maiser, what did it say in the Mishnah? Trumas Maiser, that you have to give. What's the reason? Because Trumas Maiser, it's not just that it belongs to the Kohen, it's not just a matter of a gift that you have to give, a monetary gift that it belongs to the Kohen. Trumas Maiser, it's also an Isser to eat it. You chayiv misa if you eat from this Trumas Maiser. So because it's an Isser, so therefore you can't just separate it and then say to the Kohen, it's a suffix if you're allowed to eat it. So therefore you have to give it to the Kohen. It's the same thing with Ma'isa Sheni. Ma'isa Sheni, there's an Isser to eat it outside of Yerushalayim. So over here you can't say so why wouldn't it be an obligation to separate it and bring it to Yerushalayim to be machmer because of the demai? So the Gemara explains that over here, regarding the Nachtoimen, these bakers, there was a special leniency. Amar Ola explained that these bakers, they had a lot of trouble with their business, and therefore Chachamim did not want to be extra machmer with them. Mitoich she parhedrin halolu. Since these parhedrin, which were basically like the government officials that were taking care of things and collecting taxes, and they were the ones that took care of all the regulations of the stores and so on, once every 12 months, they would hit them with all kinds of penalties and all kinds of taxes and things. And they would pressure the bakers, michru bezoil, sell a lot and sell cheap so you have a big income, so there'll be more taxes. So these appointees, these government officials would change once every 12 months, and every new official wanted to make more money and wanted to have more income, so they would put a lot of pressure and a lot of regulations on these people. So therefore, la yatrechunu Rabbanan. The Rabbanan were not machmer, they did not want to be matriach, the bakers, that they should have to give the meisters from the Dmai, which the whole thing is a chumrah. So therefore they were makel and said that they shouldn't have to give this extra chumrah. Since as Rashi brings, we always know by Dmai it says that the truth is that roiv v'amaratzim do give meisters. So we rely on that. Now the Gemara concludes and says, my parhedrin. What does the word parhedrin mean? Pursi. They're the appointees from the king, the government officials that were appointed. And that's what the parhedrin over here also meant regarding the lishkas parhedrin. The Gemara explained that the kohen, in less than 12 months, they would change. It would be a new kohen gadol, and therefore they called the room lishkas parhedrin. Amar Rabba Baba Chan Amar Rabbi Yechanan. What's the pshat of this that it says in the pasuk? Yiras Hashem, Toisif Yomim. If you God fearing, so then you add days to your life. Ushnois Rishayim, and the years of Rishayim Tiktzarna will be shortened. Yiras Hashem Toisif Yomim. Ones that are God fearing will add days. And Mikdash Rishon. Those are the Kayanim Gedalim in the first base of Mikdash. Sha'amad Abba Meis Vesashanim. First base of Mikdash stood 410 years. And during that entire time there were only 18 Kayanim. There's another Gersa, 12 Kayanim. And Taisvis here has another Gersa actually, that there were only 8 Kayanim in 410 years. That's how long they lived. Shneis Rishayim Tiktzarna, on the life of the Rishayim, are shortened. Zeh Mikdash Sheni, this is the Kayanim in the time of the second base of Mikdash. Shama Dalad Meiz Vesrim Shana. It stood 420 years. V'shimshu ba Yaisim Shloish Meis Kayanim. And during that time period, more than 300 Kayanim served in the base of Mikdash. And not only that, the Gemara explains even more. Say mem, subtract from this, mem shana sheshimish Shimon HaTzadik. 40 years, the first in the beginning of the second base of Mikdash, Shimon HaTzadik served as a Kohen Gadol. And then a Shmainim, 80 years, Sheshimish Yechanan Kohen Gadol. That Yechanan Kohen Gadol was a Kohen. Eseh, Sheshimish Yishmael ben Pabi. 10 years that the Yishmael ben Pabi was a Kohen Gadol. V'amirillah Yudalev, others say 11 years. Sheshimish Rabbi Elazar ben Charsan, the 11 years that Rabbi Elazar ben Charsan was a Kohen Gadol. So you have already deducting all of these years. So how many years do you have left over here? Under 300 years. Mikan ve'elech tzei v'chashav. So from here, go and make the calculation. Kol echad ve'echad la'hitzi shnasei. This is so many Kayanim Gedalim, they did not live so long. They did not live even for 1 year. That was the times of the second base of Mikdash. The Rebbe spoke about this in a Sichas, Amir de Gesich in Chelik Chavches Parshas Masei, and there the Rebbe says a few points. First of all, the Rebbe says here you see the tremendous milah even of these Rishayim in the second base of Mikdash. They knew that they're not going to survive the entire year, and they still did it anyways. Why? Because of the tremendous tshukkah that they had to do the Aved and go into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. So that actually shows in a way the milah that they had, the tremendous tshukkah that they had to be in the holiest place in the world to go into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Not only that, the Rebbe then connects it back to Lishkas Parhedrin. And the Rebbe says, simply, it would seem from this Gemara here that the name Lishkas Parhedrin shows us something negative. That like the appointees of government officials that exchange constantly, so these Kayanim Gedalim also would exchange constantly, and therefore the room got this negative name. But the Rebbe says, how could you say that? In connection to Yom Kippur, you're going to say they gave a name that reminds something negative. We know in Yom Kippur you're not supposed to have any negative thing that you remind. Even today in davening, you say lichayim with a shva, not lachayim with a patach. It shouldn't sound like loichayim. You don't want to mention anything negative in Yom Kippur. So here there's a name of a room that's something negative. So the Rebbe says it must be that there's also a positive meaning to this name. What's the positive meaning? The fact that it exchanges once in every 12 months is a hint to what Yom Kippur is all about. Tshuva, where a person renews himself and changes himself constantly. That's what Lishkas Parhedrin refers to. The tshuva that there is by a Yid, that's the deeper meaning of this name, and that's these Kainim, Gedalim. The fact that they change once every 12 months refers to the Chiddush that there is in the Aved of Tshuva. That's what the Rebbe explained in this Gemara here. There's actually another piece of the Gemara. We can read it over here in the Bach. It's a famous piece, and it's only appears over here in the Bach. Take a look. Why did the Kayanim not last more than 12 months? They paid to be a Kayan Gadol. A certain amount of money. She paid, Marta Basbaisis paid Yanei Malka until Yeshua ben Gamla was appointed to be a Kayan Gadol. Okay, back into the Gemara. Amar Rav Yochanan ben Tursa, mipnei ma charva Shiloi. Why was the Mishkan Shiloi destroyed? Mipnei shahaya bashnei dvarim, for two reasons. One was Gilui Arayis, and the other one was Bezayin Kachim. They disrespected the Kachim and the Shiloi. Gilui Arayis, where do you see Gilui Arayis? The immoral behavior, the Chsev, Eli Zakim Ha'oid. Eli HaKayin was very old. V'shamas kol asher banav, and he heard what his children were doing, the Chol Yisrael, to all the Yidden. V'es asher yishkevunes anoshim atzoyvis Pesach Oil Moed, and that they had relationships with the women that were waiting there by the Oil Moed. So simply it would seem like they Pashat had immoral relationships. But the Gemara explains, V'afagav da'omer Rab Shmuel bar Nachmani, Omer Rab Yochanan, that it doesn't mean kipshutei, the way the pasuk sounds, but rather this is a whole sugya in Shabbos where it talks about different people that it seems like they sinned, but they really didn't. And the Gemara there says, anyone that said that the children of Eli sinned is making a mistake. So what does it mean, the pasuk? So now these women that gave birth had to bring the birds that had to be brought as a carbon in order to be able to go back home to their husbands and be a tahir, to have a relationship with their husbands. And these Kainim, Eli's children, so they took their time. They were baligaiva and they took their time and they did not bring their carbon right away. The Torah considers it as if they had a relationship with them because they weren't allowing their wives to go back home to their husbands. So that's the Gilui Arayis that there was in the Mishkan Shiloi. Bezayin Kachim. What was the Bezayin of Kachim? So the Gemara brings a few psukim that it says in Shmuel regarding what happened. Chsiv, Gam beterem yaktirun es achelev. Even before the fats that was brought from the karbanis on the mizbeach was sacrificed, uvon nar akayin. So the lad or the sort of an agent or an attendant of the kain would come to the person that brought the carbon, and he would tell the person that's bringing the carbon, Tana basar, give me the meat that belongs to the kainim. Litzlais lekain, so the kain could roast this meat. And he would say to him, this nar of the kain would say, I don't want meat that's already cooked. I want to have raw meat that I could roast and have a geschmack meat. And the person bringing the carbon would respond and say, first let's bring the carbon, sacrifice in the mizbeach, the fats, and then then you'll take the meat that you want. And the nar of the kain would answer and say, no, give me right now, even before you bring the carbon on the mizbeach. If not, I'll take with might. And so this that the Kohen would send someone, an attendant, to go and demand the meat that they wanted, was something that was a big sin in the eyes of Hashem. That what they did over here, that they went against the carbon, that they didn't wait for it to be brought in the Mizbeach. So this was the Bezayin of Kachim. Mikdash Rishayim Ipnei Macharev. Why was the first base of Mikdash destroyed? Ipnei Gimel Dvarim Shayaboy, the three Avedas that there were, Aved Zareh, Gilui Arayis, and Shvichas Damim, the three most severe Avedas that a person has to be ready to die for. Aved Zareh, where do we find Aved Zareh on the first base of Mikdash? The Chsiv, the Pasuk says, Ki Kotzer HaMatzah Mehistareya. The matzah, which is like a couch, is too narrow to spread out a sheet in it. That's a simple translation of the pasuk. What is this? So the Gemara darshans this pasuk. What it means is, "My kotzer matzah mistareya." Hamer Rabbi Yonasan kotzer matzah zeh. This couch, this place where the Eibishter resides, so to speak, the place where the Shechina is too narrow. Mehistarer olav shnei reim, to shear it together with another friend. The Yidden placed over there at Tselem, the Yidden placed over the Zara in the Beis Hamikdash, and the Eibishter says it's too narrow of a place to be there ke'echa together. Then that pasuk continues and concludes and says, "Va'amasecha tzara kehiskanes," and the cover is too narrow of being gathered. So the Gemara darshans this part of the pasuk as well. Omer Rav Shmuel bar Nachmani, Kimat Rav Yonasan lahaikra. When he came to this part of the pasuk, Bachi, he cried and he said, "Man dechsivbe," regarding whom it says, regarding the Eibishter, Kainis Kaneid Mea Yom, that the Eibishter gathers the waters of the Yamsuf by Kriyas Yamsuf. Now Nasasle Masecha Tzara, Masecha, which refers like the Egel Masecha, refers to Avodah Zarah, became now a Tzara, became like a rival to the Eibishter because Yidden brought Avodah Zarah into the Beis HaMikdash. So this is where we see Avodah Zarah. Gilui Arayis, the Chsiv, the Pasuk says in the times of the first Beis HaMikdash, Vayomer Hashem Yanki Gavu B'nai Tzion, because the B'nai Tzion were haughty. Vatelachna Netuyas Garden, they go with outstretched necks. Umeshakre Seinayim. and with their eyes that are meshakres. How do they translate meshakres over there? That
with gazing eyes.
Gazing eyes. Halech v'tofeif, and they go and tofeif. What's the translation of tofeif? Floating. They're floating. Telachna. Uberagleyen teachasna, and with their feet they spew venom. That's the pasuk that it says in the times of the first Beis Hamikdash. Now, what is this referring to? So the Gemara is going to touch the whole pasuk. Yan kigavu b'nais tzion. What does this mean? Shoyim mahalchais arucha b'tzad ktsara. The girls that would walk a tall one near a short one in order to attract attention to themselves. They would go with outstretched necks, which means they would go with an erect posture again, also to attract attention to themselves. What does this mean? They would put a lot of makeup on their eyes to attract attention to themselves. They would go floating. What does this mean? They would walk their heel near their toe, meaning they would walk very slowly in the street in order for people to look at them. And with their feet they would spew venom. They would bring all kinds of perfume, whether it's mor, afarsimon, which is balsam oil, they would put it inside their shoes. And then they would pass by the Yidden when they were the Bachrim, the boys. They would bang with their feet, and the smell would go to them. And it would arouse the Yetzer Hara of these boys, like when you have a snake that poisonous, the poison that goes into a snake, the angry snake that aroused the Yetzer Hara in a very strong way. So this is the behavior of Gilui Arayis that there was in that time. Shvichas damim. Where do you find shvichas damim in the first Beis Hamikdash? Chsiv v'gam dam nokti shofach Menashe harba moed. There was a lot of blood that was spilled in the times of Menashe. Yerushalayim was filled with blood that was spilled in his times. That was the reason why the first Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. Now the Gemara says, Avo Mikdasheni. Now the second. Correct. The Kohanim Gedalim were tzaddikim, but there were these three Avedas amongst the Yidden. When you come to the second Beis Hamikdash, that Yidden did Teira, mitzvahs, and even Gemilas Chasadim as well. Why was it destroyed? The answer is because of the baseless hatred that there was amongst Yidden. This comes to teach you. Sheshkula sinas chinam keneged shalosh avedes. Sinas chinam is as severe as all three avedes: Avodah Zarah, Gilui Arayis, and Shvichas Damim. That was the reason why the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. So many times that Rebbe quoted this, that Rebbe would say, so from this Gemara we see that the way to rebuild the Beis Hamikdash is the opposite: to have avas chinam, to have baseless love for another Yid. That the famous Varta the Baal Shem Tov, even of a Yid that you never met in a different side of the world, you should have just a baseless love for him just because he's a Yid. Going back to the first Beis Hamikdash, Rishayim Hayu, in the first Beis Hamikdash, there were great Rishayim, and they still had betachin in the Eibishter. They said that they'll be okay. Asal and Mikdash Rishon, this is talking about in the times of the first Beis Hamikdash. It says there, Rasheha b'sheichid yishpaitu. Their leaders, they judged with bribery. Koyaneh b'mechir yoiru. And their Koyanim, they also taught with for money. And the Nevi'im also said the Nevuah only for money. But still, Bal Hashem Yishanu, and they relied on the Eibush Lema, and they said, Haloi Hashem bekebeinu, Hashem is amongst us, Leitov aleinu ra, nothing negative will happen to us. Lefichach, Hevi Alein, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Gimel, Gzeiris, the Eibush brought upon them 3 different decrees, Keneged, Gimel Averis Shebi Yodam. Because of these 3 Averis that they had in their hand, there are 2 pshatim with this. Rashi says in another place, not here, but that the 3 Averis refers to the 3 Averis that it says over here in this pasuk, the Shoichad, and the Mechir, and the Kesef. But the Marsha says that it refers to the 3 Averis of Avodah Zarah, Gilui Arayis, and Shvichas Damim. So we see that there were 3 Gezeiris. Shenema, the pasuk says, when it speaks about the destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash, L'chein, Beglalchem, because of your behavior, it's Tzia Sadeh Techrash. The place of the Beis Hamikdash will be plowed like a field. V'Yerushalayim Ayin Tiyeh, and Yerushalayim will be like a heap in the ground. V'Vahar Abayis L'Bamis Yad, and it'll become like a forest, like a place which is totally desolate. Fragt the Gemara, the in the first Beis HaMikdash there wasn't any sinas chinam, we gave that as the reason only for the destruction of the second Beis HaMikdash. But Vaksiv, there's a pasuk that says, Negurei el cherev hoyu esami, they were afraid of the swords, my people were afraid of a sword, L'chein sfaik el yarech, and therefore you bang your thigh. What does this pasuk mean? Vama Rabbi Lazar dash in this pasuk, Eilu b'nei Adam, this what this pasuk is referring to his people, Sha'ichlem v'shaisen zemzeh, they eat with one another, but v'daikirin zeh b'charvais shabalashainam, but they are steching, or they're hurting one another with the sword of their words. They're speaking to one another not nicely. So we see over here that there was this baseless hatred even in the time of the first Beis HaMikdash. So the Gemara answers, it was, but Ahi ben Isi Yisrael Avoy. That pasuk is only referring to leaders amongst Eden, but by them this happened, but not amongst all the Klal Yisrael. Chsiv, there's another pasuk that says, Zoak v'hilel, that you cry and scream to the Eibishter ben Adam, ki hi haisa ba'ami, that this was amongst my nation. V'tanya, Zoak, it's in that same pasuk before, and so the Brisa explains, Zoak v'hilel ben Adam, yachol l'choil. You would think that this issue that there was of sinas china was amongst all. Talmud Loimar, so it says there further in the pasuk, he b'chol nesiya Yisrael. This was only an issue amongst the Nesim of the Eden, not amongst all the Klal Yisrael. Rabbi Yechon and Rabbi Lazar Damri Tavayu, Rabbi Yechon and Rabbi Lazar both said, Rishayim shenizgala avainam. The earlier ones in the first Beis HaMikdash, because they sinned and openly. They did not sin in hiding. It was open. Nizgala kitzam. So the time of when the Beis HaMikdash is going to be rebuilt was also open and revealed to them. When they went to Galus, they were told that it's going to be 70 years. Achrayim, when it came to the ones in the second Beis HaMikdash, shaloi nizgala avainam. So they would sin and discreetly, not openly, lai nizgala kitzam. So therefore also the time of when the Beis HaMikdash will be rebuilt was also not revealed. Amar Rabbi Yechanan says, the footnails of the nails of the earlier generation from the first Beis HaMikdash is greater from the stomach than the later generations. They were on a higher level, even though it would seem we said that they sinned with Avodah Zarah, Gilad Aish, Shvichas Damim, but they were higher, they were much greater than the ones that were in the second Beis HaMikdash. Reish Lakish responded, no, it's not so. Adarab, Achrayim Adifi, the ones in the second Beis HaMikdash, the ones that were later, are better off than them. Why? Afal Gav, Digi Shibud Malchis, because even though in this time period there was a shibud, there was the subjugation of the government, of the kingdom, but nevertheless, Ka'aski B'Teira, they still continue learning Teira. So they have a harder time and they still learn Teira. So they're on a higher level. Amalei, so Rabbi Yechanan said, no, Bira Techiach. Look, the Beis HaMikdash itself will prove to you. Shechazra al-Rishayim, the ones that sinned in the first Beis HaMikdash, it was rebuilt. V'lechazra al-Achrayim, it wasn't rebuilt for the ones that were destroyed. It wasn't yet rebuilt, the ones that were destroyed in the second Beis HaMikdash. Shalos Rabbi Lazar, the question was asked from Rabbi Lazar, Rishayim Gedalim, are the ones in the first Beis HaMikdash greater? Or Achrayim Gedalim, or are the ones in the second Beis HaMikdash greater? Amalehem, Tnu Einechem Bebira. Look at the place in the Beis HaMikdash, look if it was rebuilt or not. Ikadamri, others said this in a different version. Amalehem Eidechem Bira, your testimony is the Beis HaMikdash. The first Beis HaMikdash was rebuilt, and the second Beis HaMikdash was not rebuilt. The Gemara brings a story. Reish Lakish havesachi b'Yardena. Reish Lakish was washing himself. He was bathing in the Yarden River. Asa Rabbi Babachana. So Rabbi Babachana was there. He came, and Yav leYad, he gave him a hand to support him to be able to come out. Amalei Reish Lakish told Rabbi Babachana, Elokah sanina lechu. The Eibishter hates you people that come from Bavel. Why is this? Because there's a pasuk that says, Im chayma if it's a wall, nivna le tiras kesef. We build upon this silver. Vim delasi, if it's a door, nitzar le luach eres. Then we put upon it a plank of cedar wood. What is the meaning of this pasuk? It refers, it's a mashal. It all refers to the Yidden coming back to build the Beis HaMikdash. If you will come back and build the Beis HaMikdash like a wall, va'alisam kulchem, you come up just like a wall that's all together as one, and the Yidden will all come together in unity to build the Beis HaMikdash. Va'alisam kulchem yimei Ezra, and you would come up in the time of Ezra, everybody together. Then nimshaltem kekesef, you would be compared to silver. She'ein rekev she'elet boy. There's no decay that will be in silver, and the Beis HaMikdash, the second Beis HaMikdash, would have lasted forever. But Achshav, Sha'alisem Kedalses, now that you people from Bavel that only came up like a door, that some came up, some did not come up, and many of Yidden, or maybe even half of Klal Yisrael, stayed in Bavel, Nimshaltem Keres, you're compared to a cedar tree, Shaharekev Shelet Boy, that it does get decayed. My Erez, so the Gemara explains what is the decay of a cedar tree. Amar Ule Sasmegor, there's this worm, Sasmegor, that causes it to decay. And my Sasmegor, what is the decay that happened amongst Klal Yisrael? Amar Abba said Baskel, that now we only can hear a Baskel from the Eibishter, meaning that there's no more Nevuah. Kedetanya, like it says in the Braisa, Mishemesu, Nevi'im Ha'achrayim, when the last of the Nevi'im passed away, which was Chagi, Zchariah, Malachi, Nestalka Ruach HaKodesh Miyisrael. The Ruach HaKodesh was removed from the Yidden. But Vadayin Oyim Mishtamshim Bebaskel. But you can still use and hear a voice from the Eibishter, which is a baskel, which is only like the literal translation of baskel means like an echo, which is not, you can't hear directly on a vur from the Eibishter. There's a sikha from the Rebbe where the Rebbe is medayik this lashon nistalka. Nistalka does not mean that it's completely annulled, that there's no possibility for nevuah at all. Nistalka means that it's removed, meaning that it's not common, that it's not, that the regular level of nevuah doesn't exist anymore, and it's not common, but it's still possible, and there still could be the union of nevuah, even bisman hazeh. The Gemara is never saying that it's impossible for that to be a nevuah. So Rebbe's dik in the Gemara, the Rebbe has a whole basis for this in a few different places, from the Rambam and so on, that there could be nevuah even bisman hazeh. Yeah, and it came back. The Rambam says, the Rebbe brings that the Rambam says it came back, correct. So now the Gemara comments regarding this story. That it says there that Reish Lakish said this to Rabbi Bar Bar Chana. Fragt the Gemara, Reish Lakish, mi mishtoi ba'adei Rabbi Bar Bar Chana. Could we say that Reish Lakish had this conversation with Rabbi Bar Bar Chana? We know that he didn't speak to anybody. Why? Because Uma Rebbe Lazar, the Mare, the Arad Yisrael Ave. Belazar, which was the leader amongst Yidden in Eretz Yisrael. V'lo yave mishtoi Reish Lakish ba'adei. Reish Lakish didn't speak to anybody, even a person like him. Why not? The man the mishtoi Reish Lakish ba'adei, Reish Lakish had such a great stature amongst people that whoever Reish Lakish spoke to, beshuk, in the marketplace outside, yavulei iske, beloi sadi, people would do business with this person without having any testimony, without knowing who they is. If Reish Lakish is speaking to you, you're for sure a trustworthy person, you're for sure a tzaddik. So therefore, Reish Lakish did not want anyone to rely on him, so Reish Lakish made it a custom not to speak to anybody. So Bahadi, Rabbi Bar Bar Chana mishtoi, if he didn't speak to Rabbi Lazar, did he speak to Rabbi Bar Bar Chana? How could have this story happened that he had this conversation with Rabbi Bar Bar Chana? Rav Papa says, so you're right, you have to add something to the story. Shadi Gavre Beinayu. You have to say that there was another person over there as well, that Reish Lakish was wasn't speaking to Rabbi Bar Bar Chana. Huh?
Directly.
Wasn't speaking directly, right. There was a middleman. It wasn't speaking directly. He gave over the message through someone else. Or we have to change the story and say, Reish Lakish have v'zeiri. It was Reish Lakish and Zeiri. And Zeiri, he did speak to it. Zeiri was a great Ameire, and he did speak to him. Rabbi Bar Bar Chana have v'Rabbi Lazar. Or the story happened between Rabbi Bar Bar Chana and Rabbi Lazar. Rabbi Lazar was the one that was washing himself in the Yarden, not Reish Lakish. When they came to Rabbi Yochanan disagreed with this whole thing that Reish Lakish said. Reish Lakish said that the Eibishter is angry at the Yidden of Bavel because they didn't come up to build the second Beis HaMikdash, and that's the only reason the second Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. So Rabbi Yochanan said that's not the reason. That's not the reason. Even if all Yidden would have come up to Eretz Yisrael, to the Beis HaMikdash in the time of Ezra, the Beis HaMikdash would not have remained forever in the second Beis HaMikdash. Why not? The Pasuk says, Yaft Elikim liyefes, the Eibishter gave beauty to Yefes, and v'yishkaim ba'olei shem, and he dwells in the tents of shame. So what does this mean? Afagav the Yaft Elikim liyefes, even though the Eibishter gave beauty to Yefes, and Rashi explains who's Yefes, who are the descendants of Yefes, the Persians. And they were zeicha to build the second Beis HaMikdash, which was a beautiful Beis HaMikdash, even nicer than the first Beis HaMikdash. So they were zeicha that the beauty of the Eibishter was there in this Beis HaMikdash. But ein ha-shechina sheire ela ba'olei shem. But where is the Shechina dwelling much stronger? It's much more in Olei Shem, which is the Beis HaMikdash built in the through Shlomo Melech, the first Beis HaMikdash. So therefore, the reason why Rabbi Yochanan is saying the reason why the second Beis HaMikdash didn't last is because it was built through the Parsia. That's the reason, not because the Yidden didn't all come up from Bavel.